Hey everyone, my name is Andrew Davis, and you are watching Season 3 of Conversations in Pop Culture, brought to you by my sponsors, Mixum Printing, the smarter way to print. I know printing your creative project can be confusing and stressful, but Mixum is here to make it easy. From their instant quote calculator that lets you get as many quotes as you want for free to their 24-hour customer service support, Mixum is here to make sure your printing experience runs smoothly from start to finish. And right now, you can choose from a range of premium printing options and materials. And the company has also printed so many successful Kickstarter campaigns, a bunch of them you've even heard about on this very show. And they currently offer services in the United States, Canada, Australia, and the UK. And Mixum can print and reach your audience anywhere in the world. So if you're ready to print smarter, not harder, head over to mixum.com. And they're running a promotion where listeners of my show can drop my name, Andrew Davis, in a message tab of a current order to get a 5% discount on their first order. So that is mixam.com. Again, type my name, Andrew Davis, in the message tab to get a 5% discount on your first order. I am also sponsored by BCW Supplies. At checkout, use Pop Anime Comics to get 10% off your order. Bags, boards, long boxes, they are expensive. I want my comics to stay neat, stay safe, stay protected. And if you're running a Kickstarter, you have to send me your book. I want it to be protected. So please use that code to protect your books and to protect my books in the mail. It means a lot to me. I also have a t-shirt that is up on Redbubble. It is this bad boy right here. I am absolutely shelling all my products today, and that is on Redbubble in the description. And without further ado, I have with me comic creator and artist Tom Rasch. So welcome back to the show.
Hey, Andrew, it's good to see you again. And I was going to say that was quite a mouthful, but guess what? You sounded like a pro. So good job.
I try, and I'm getting paid, so that's all that matters. And it's not that I went on my money tour. So, but Mixum's really great, and I love Mixum. So welcome back, though. I'm very excited to have you back because obviously you got a lot of stuff going on with Black Alpha. You got stuff going on with Salem Tusk, and you got a few other things going on. But before we really dive into all of that, I do want to talk a little bit about your background because you got a very interesting background because you've done stuff in video games, you've done stuff with Marvel. Obviously, people know you from Punisher 2099. And so, how did you get involved in comics completely? I know we touched on it the last interview, but for those who are hearing and seeing this interview for the first time and listening to you for the first time, I find it very interesting because your career path is not normal, for lack of a better word.
No, that's very true. And I've said this for quite some time that in the age of social media, as much as we think at times we're the center of kind of our own little universe, that there's always going to be people that are new and introduced to who you are, what you do, et cetera. So I don't ever mind kind of going over, the path. And like you said, if you have new viewers, hopefully this will enlighten them. So yes, since I was a young child, I've loved drawing. At about 5 years old, my mother Maggie was an amazing artist, and our family, which included my mom and my sister Mary's little, and my dad Bob, were stationed in Guam. And two amazing things happened. I watched television, my first memories of television as a young boy, and I saw Star Trek, Batman, and Spider-Man on all at the same time. I was instantly smitten. I've never looked back. And around the same time, I also started drawing. I love my mom's drawings, and so I would copy them, and that just became probably a little bit of a hobby, but probably a passion without realizing it. And so for many years, I've followed everything that had to do with art, anything to do with comics, science fiction, superheroes, TV shows, movies that were along that same genre line. And so around 5th grade or so, another major thing happened as I decided I wanted to possibly draw comic books for a living. And I also created my first original character, Black Alpha. There would be others to follow, including Salem Tusk. But at this time,
I just get to it. I promise.
Well, exactly. But I will say that, yeah, I think that, as I decided that's what I wanted to do, it probably took a number of years before I actually tried to figure out how do you do that. And so when I was in my teens, I started getting these magazines in the early 80s. One of them was called Comic Scene, and it very much was kind of like my Bible on answering questions about comics, the comics books industry. And then I started kind of taking notes and figuring out how do I do this. And then after reading a number of articles, I realized I have to go to a comic book convention. And so in my very early 20s, I went to San Diego Comic-Con of '89, and I got shot down immediately by both Marvel and DC. They were the first two that shot me down immediately. And I walked away from that experience somewhat deflated up until the last day of the con, and then I talked to an inker, Carl Kessel, who had inked John Byrne on Superman, one of my favorite artists my whole life, and he gave me encouragement about my rendering and line work, and he was kind of the voice I needed because up to that point, you sort of I think it's necessary because when you grow up kind of in a bubble, like, within your friends and family and everyone thinks you're great, and then you try and kind of enter the big leagues, you find out you're not so great. And I think you kind of need to hear that. So long story short, after he gave me some advice and gave me some encouragement, I took off probably a few years before returning with a couple of good buddies to my next Comic Con. And I decided to repeat the same path. And I went to DC Comics first. And the first things out of their mouth was, "Who are you working for, Tom?" And that's how the entire rest of that Comic Con weekend, that's also around the time Image blew up. And so I got a lot more positive feedback and actually talked to a few artists to take a look at my work. And they took me around to meet their editors. A number of circumstances happened. And a few months later, Marvel gave me the call. And I thought it was a practical joke when I got it. But I was so excited and super nervous. And I was actually the last artist too on Punisher 2099. So I learned an experience there that just because you get your foot in the door, that doesn't mean, hey, I made it.
Yeah,
And
let's
here's
talk
whatever.
about that because obviously, though, I do want to talk about Punisher 2099 because that's what people know you for. That's what a lot of people still know you for, which is kind of crazy because that is old. No offense to you, but that is not a new book. And so, what was that like working on that and getting to work on this character? Because you really sort of were the last custodial of that character for the longest time.
I equate it to if you're an actor and you want to try and get a gig on a TV show or movie, and you get a call, especially from Marvel's the biggest comic book publisher there is out there, and really has been in my age, for many many years. And I think it's that excitement, and then there was also, like I said, a lot of nervousness. And I think what I enjoyed about being offered that particular title was that I kind of like the notion of most of my favorite artists growing up. They put their stamp on a character, like Todd McFarlane. I think Todd McFarlane, Spawn, before Spawn, it was Spider-Man. John Byrne was X-Men. There's certain artists out there that really, like I said, put their stamp. And I decided rather than getting like offered the X-Men or anything, Batman, I was excited that a version of the Punisher was something that I could sort of give my artistic flair. And it made me feel pretty good because when I started talking to Marvel, they sent me a letter telling me that the editorial rate committee had established what my page rate was. And back then, I don't know if it's changed that much. Back then, a new penciler and a title got $80 per page. Marvel was actually going to pay me more at one of their top rates, which was 125, because I think they felt like maybe we can groom you into being a superstar, along the lines of like Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee, and but then the market bottomed out not too long after that, and then that's when kind of the reality of where things are at kind of hit me in the face. And so I tried to get other work after that. And like, a couple of the editors I had worked for, one went over to Harris and worked on Vampirelli, tried to get me on there. The other one, Joey Cavalieri, was working at Superman, tried to get on there. And it was kind of tough when you're a newbie, right? I mean, those go to the veterans. And so I kind of wandered for a while. And then not too long after that, a couple of my friends who also wanted to do comics, they got involved in concept art for video games. And they told me, they're like, you should come over here and try and do this. The money's way better. You're a salaried employee. You got benefits. And so even that took a little bit, but I finally got and everything that I wanted to do, unfortunately, involves getting your foot in the door. It's not just a simple
Let's talk about all this because this is super fascinating because I think that there's a term I like to use and it's called temp work. It's the idea that when you're writing comics or even with me with sponsorships, it is temporary, meaning that there is no guarantee. And so what is that like? 'Cause I think that's a big common mistake a lot of people make in comics is that just because you're hired by DC doesn't mean you're going to stay in DC, doesn't mean you're going to stay in Marvel. And you are really saying as long as DC likes you and a book is doing well, you're going to be on that book. And then if they still like you as a writer, you're talented enough, you might, or an artist, you might move to another book, but there's still no guarantee. And we see people moving around all the time in comics. And so what was that like? Because obviously you experienced that in it and then just finding new work, especially at the start of your career, because you sort of just fell into the right position, but then the market went to hell in a lot of ways. And so that's a very interesting position because nobody talks about this in comics at all.
No, and I think, well, I mean, as somebody that I think you have to be educated personally, you have to live it to really understand that the emotions you go through, I think, are one of those, as the old saying goes, you kind of really literally have to roll with the punches because when you, and I'm sure any creative field, honestly, like you said, is this way. I mean, we hear stories of actors who got a big break and for whatever reason, circumstances were not on their side and they weren't able to maintain momentum
I mean,
with their
look at
acting
my
career.
podcast. It's taken me 9 years in two podcasts, two sort of different fields that are similar to even get to the point where I am breaking even. If for this is the first 12-month cycle, and I'm about 7 months in, that I'm going to not lose money. It took me 10 years. I mean, and that's crazy in a lot of ways. And again, so it's something that I think people don't understand, and people don't talk about this ever in comics. But continue.
Well, and the thing is, I've even seen this happen in the current age on social media that there's people that I know that are especially independent comic creators that have to work a day job. And I think they feel like if they could do art full time, that means they've made it. And to me, that's not really true. Not so more. I mean, not so much, especially now because the entertainment market is at its most volatile right now. I mean, because of COVID, because of a number of things, there's no guarantees and there's less now. I think, competition factors higher. There's a number of variables where to me, there's no shame in trying to do creative endeavors on the side. And I think, because I mean, I've done both. I work a regular job, I've worked a regular job. I've been a paid professional artist for years. And that doesn't change the fact that I still, if I wanted to do my comics, they have to be done on the side. And I think that you definitely, I think you have to have the right demeanor for accepting the roller coaster of someone who's going to work in the entertainment field. Period. That
It's also because you touched on something, and my friend Larry, who does Niobe Comics, he works a day job, and he has a very successful book. He almost did 25,000 on his last Kickstarter, and it's a great book. If everybody wants to go check out Niobe, I just got mine, and I can't plug his book enough. But he works a day job, and obviously, you mentioned something where you move to video games, and one of the things is that benefits and things like that too. And that's another thing that I think people don't recognize in comics as well, is that if you're writing a page rate and you're not a staff writer, you're not getting benefits. And even in some companies, even if you are a staff writer, you're not getting benefits either. And that's something that can be worth real money. And depending on your circumstance and where you're at with your family, you're single, your age, benefits can go a long way in a
Mhm.
lot of ways. It's something that I'm well aware of. I want to be an employee. I purposely, and with my creative endeavors, I will go create an LLC and do it on the side. And that's just bonus money for me. But I don't want to be full time because health insurance is expensive in the United States. And I think people don't understand that when they're like, I want to be a creative full time. Well, this stuff's expensive. I mean, healthcare is not cheap in America, is all I'm going to say. So,
Well, and I will say this. I mean, also, I've had different chapters in my professional career where I've been a freelancer. I didn't enjoy that all that much because same thing. I'm not the kind of person that likes the constant hustle. Like you got to hustle hard. Otherwise you could have a 3 month dry stretch where you're wondering how you're going to pay your bills. That's not really good for me. So I try and always have a regular gig. That does take the pressure off. I think when I've seen people online lament about how they're hoping their comics are going to be able to sustain a livelihood, which is in this day and age, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's pretty difficult to do. And so for me personally, I always try and find a regular gig to make sure that, especially I'm a father now, so I definitely need to have a regular gig to provide for my daughter. She's only 3. And I mean, and also like I haven't worked full time in video games now for at least several years. I've had offers, but that would also require me moving around a lot. Again, that's the other thing too. Like working in video games, when things were at a normal kind of rhythm, you could work at a studio for 2 years. You ship the game, then your team gets cut loose, and then you got to find the next gig, which required a lot of moving around. And I sort of kind of got tired of that. I even in the last few to several years, I had an offer to work at a company called Good Games. They're based out of Germany. I would have had to move to Germany. Another one was based out of Mesa, Arizona. I kind of got tired of that, where I'm like, I think I'm going to still do entertainment, but I'm going to do it kind of on my terms on the side while I make sure that I have a regular gig, especially providing for my daughter. And I feel like we're kind of bouncing around on subjects here, but I will say that ultimately, with the stuff I've gone through, I sort of feel like it's kind of come full circle. Like I started out as a young child being passionate about my own characters and what I wanted to do with them. And now that all these years later, because of what has happened to me in comics and games, and I've done a bit of film work too, that I decided if I'm going to really continue as I get older, put energy into creative things, I'm going to do it for myself. I'm not interested in, making any more money for Marvel or even the video companies that I worked for. I'm like, somewhere down the road, there is a bit of a, there's a bit of a pipe dream, but the goal would be to figure out how to monetize your own content. So,
And we're going to talk about
strategy.
Sound Tusk and Black Alpha in a second, but you did mention something that I do want to talk about because obviously I'm very interested in media. I love companies like AT&T and Blackstone just said they're throwing $2 billion plus into a new movie studio run by Disney executives. But I also recognize the idea that everything is coming to sort of a cold death in a lot of ways, where there is so much division and everything has been almost halved, where there's Peacock, Hulu, Crunchyroll, Amazon, Netflix, you could go to Amazon and order Blu-rays. You could go to Funimation has something. Anything you want. Every company has a network now. WWE has a network, and so there's a lot more competition. And also, there's been a lot of views have been cut because there's an infinite amount of content out there. And so that's something that I'm very curious about how you feel, because obviously you've done a little bit of everything, and you're significantly older than me. And you've seen a lot more because I was born in the '93. And so where do you foresee all of media going and everything going in that realm? Because to me, it seems that there's more choice, but that also cuts viewership tremendously. I mean, I was very young when the last episode of Seinfeld aired, but that had 70 plus million people watching. That can never happen again unless it's the Super Bowl. That's the only time it ever happens right now is, if you get 20 million people watching finale, like I think that's what Big Bang did around that number. That's impressive. So I'm curious how you feel, because you did sort of touch a little bit upon that with all the competition that's out there.
Well, I sort of, if I can equate an analogy, I would say that, what I've seen, like if I'm standing on a bridge and I turn around and what I've seen behind me, and then what I see ahead of me, it's a bit of a kind of a tightrope to sort of figure out where I land, because of my influences, my experiences, and then trying to stay on the pulse of what's ahead. I do feel like, the world of business, when it comes to accumulating any kind of money, can be very shrewd and ruthless. And so obviously that doesn't change, especially, we've had a lot more of the conglomerates sort of becoming these huge monolithic giants. And I do feel like at times, it's an interesting dichotomy, because I feel like as fans, we get a lot more options, right? I mean, we get more things we never thought we would see, especially comic fans. There's all these shows that are like on HBO Max, the DC characters. Disney's got, Marvel and Star Wars under their belt. And then everyone else is trying to find their version of that. But if they're careful, there's an old saying about the snake eating its own tail, that it could kind of self cannibalize, because everyone is trying to do their best to get their market share. And there's a lot of more white noise to go through. And so I feel like if they're not careful, some of that could definitely snuff out, because there's too much to offer, and people, and then they're going to be splintering their audience in all these different directions. And therefore, whatever they feel like their strategy is to accumulate their place on the top of the perch is going to get pretty flimsy, I think. So I do feel like there's got to be a bit of more care when it comes to the life. Like a lot of people now rush into things too. It's interesting, like how things were given a chance to breathe as far as IP goes. And nowadays you got to get those numbers right out the gate in almost any form.
I mean, a perfect example is Cowboy Bebop, where that
exactly.
had no time to breathe. It had no time to breathe. It had no time to get a public reaction or somebody to take a second bite. And they could have waited like a month. They legitimately could have waited a month before they made a decision. They made a decision within like 3 days.
That happened to Swamp Thing also. Like I think 1 or 2 episodes aired and it was already canceled. It was being reported being canceled in the media.
And so it's very interesting, because obviously when we talk about monetization and just choice, choice is good, but I feel choice is also bad in a lot of ways. And it is a very complicated entity. And I know this, in which I started doing live stuff in 2020, and my numbers in 2020 were a lot better than they are in 2022. And the reason why is there's a lot more people's content out there, and there's a lot more competition, and it is complicated, and podcasting as an entity is become a lot trickier, as well as distribution and a variety of other things that factor into that. But there are a lot more shows now, and that takes up more bandwidth. There's a lot more people doing live streams, and I know so many people who do live streams, every Tuesday, every Wednesday, and unfortunately, we are all competing with each other just because there's only so much time that somebody has in their day. So
Well, and I was going to say, I know for me personally, I sort of had to give myself a pep talk at least a couple of years ago, because I was kind of in this weird nether realm of frustration, because I've been, dealing with the Hollywood end of things from IP now for several, 8, 9 years. And I'd always get these feedback that whatever I was trying to do, they're like, oh, well, we've already got one of those, or, you know what I mean? That's something you hear a lot. And so, of course, I was kind of going through this like dichotomy of really enjoying the pop culture juggernauts I've grown up with, but also being frustrated because I felt like, because of those that investment that the big companies had, the corporations in those major IPs, those brand names, they will do a lot of what they can to snuff out new stuff. Now, I know there's a few things that filter through, like, Stranger Things. There's the occasional rare story where a brand new IP is allowed to kind of sneak through and becomes, a juggernaut. Like, to me, Stranger Things is in a weird place because it's not based on any previous known IP, but what it has on its side is the major nostalgia factor of anyone who grew up in 80s and, loving any 80s pop culture. That's, to me, is kind of where I feel like it's got a bit of its hook with an audience. And then, of course, The Walking Dead became a new pop culture phenom, and Game of Thrones. And both of those are based on a book or a comic, indie comic, but to the mainstream public, they weren't aware of those. So it proves that new IP can make it through. However, I do feel like over 90% of the time, the companies will do their best to make sure, and this is where people who are in the indie market sort of have an uphill battle, and myself included, that you sort of have to recognize, same thing, you're having to get your characters, your universes out amongst all the white noise, because, the exciting thing about the internet is you can find an audience. You know what I mean? You can publish a web comic. You can do anything to get audience, but it's like, but now you're also competing with thousands of other people, when there used to be more of a smaller conduit based upon the gatekeepers to get your content out to even any audience exposure. So it's a catch-22, but at the same token, I'm not going to give up trying. I guess I always tell people, I feel, if anything, because I have been able to at least pierce that veil a little bit of having Hollywood interested in some of my IPs, that it does show that people somewhat in the inner circle at least see the potential and the merit. So that, to me, is a good reflection of my instincts, is how I put it, because every person's human, and I've had my moments in a bubble where I'm like, is my stuff really as cool or good as I think it is, or is it just because people get caught up in my enthusiasm and that's why they like it? Is the IP itself really any good? But I've had to, everyone has those kind of imposter syndrome moments, and I sort of talk myself out of that and just decide I'm going to keep forging ahead honestly in my path, and on my path. And you and I talked about it before, I think, when we did the Kickstarter. That's when I kind of had to re-embrace the notion of the getting away from the glamour of a TV show or movie or cartoon or whatever, and getting back to how beautiful comics are as a medium, and also releasing, in my case anyway, the expectation that I'm going to be wealthy off comics of my own characters, like during the Image heyday. Those guys were at the right place at the right time. We're in a very different world and market now. So it's more about the matter of just the appreciation of getting story out to a loyal audience.
It's also, I feel right now, so I was successful on Kickstarter, and I funded 114% in January. I had 38 backers. I think I converted 7 or 8 new backers, which is pretty cool, who have never been on my show before, who felt comfortable enough, which is a big victory. And people might not think it is, but to me, that's a huge victory. And that also helps, where it just keeps me in the game for another year. And sometimes in life, that's what you need. So obviously, I'm growing. I'm laying out a lot of infrastructure this entire year. I started last year, and I'm now continuing that. And I'm not losing money, which is fine. So I'm not going to become rich off of my podcast, at least not right now. There are other methods I make money in that relate to my podcast, but the podcast itself is probably not going to be my money maker, but by definition for the next few years. But it's also the fact that sometimes you just got to stay in the game and be above, the negative in a lot of ways. And I find that's what Kickstarter for me is, at the very least. And for other people, it's different, but that's a whole can of worms, and everybody has a different version and how they utilize Kickstarter. But I do want to talk about Black Alpha because a lot of stuff's going on with this. And so what is Black Alpha? The basic pitch. And if you want to know more about Black Alpha, go check out the first interview we did, because we spoke about that extensively. But what is the basic pitch of Black Alpha for those who don't know what's going on? Because I really want to talk about what is going on with it.
Once again, the basic elevator pitch is, what if you took the Batman story, you sprinkled in some Iron Man tech, and you dropped it off in the middle of a Star Wars-like universe? And it was published in USA Today, and that's really kind of what the article that was an interview with me was kind of the gist of, was sort of taking, and I myself as a content creator, probably like a lot of people out there, I create what I love. And once again, since I saw Batman and Spider-Man with Star Trek, it only makes sense that my first thing out of the gate, my first original creation would be superhero-esque mythology combined with science fiction space opera.
And then let's even go a little bit further. It's just to give a little bit more context. Black Alpha has a long history where there have been pre-art that was featured on Big Bang. There was a ship in Raj's apartment or in his office, I forget exactly where it is. And then it's sort of been optioned. The first issue, I think, came out, and then it had a very successful Kickstarter, and a lot of stuff has gone to produce Black Alpha and really get that story out. Obviously, these are some issues. I know you're in the middle of fulfilling with Black Alpha at the moment. And so what has this been like? Because it has gone through a lot of media. It has had a lot of media exposure, and it has had a hell of a journey to get it to where it is right now.
It's right now I'm kind of on a bit of a high with it, sort of a blissful moment, because since the Kickstarter was a success, that allowed me to get other people involved to help create the content. I can't see, for years I thought I could do it all by myself. For the people who don't realize, comics are a ton of work, and it depends. I think, there's different, so many styles of comic book art that can be done, and maybe a little bit more of those are like, they're a little less labor intensive. But for me, the issue's been, a number of ups and downs in my life. And so I ended up even hiring somebody to help me with the first issue, Christian Colbert. And so it's been sitting there kind of in stasis now for several years. And also during that time, I learned things, and sometimes I have to learn from mistakes. That was also after the first issue came out. That's when kind of the Hollywood machine started coming and came calling. And I got a little bit seduced by, we want to make, and it looks like it's going to be a show. And this has happened with 3 different production companies. And I kept thinking, well, when the show finally takes off, and, because a lot of times I got offered an executive producer agreement with whoever I signed with, and they even laid out how much I would be making as an executive producer on a cartoon or whatever. So I was always going, well, when this happens, I will go ahead and have the money to basically hire my team to continue the comics. And of course, that didn't happen. That was 3 different times. And for anyone out there not in the know, that when you're dealing with your thing possibly becoming a TV show or movie, same thing. There's so many steps. It doesn't mean it's automatically that you're there. It's going to get there. And I had to learn that the hard way. And it's been optioned 3 times. And, if you read behind the scenes on things that have finally, like stuff based on books from decades ago, sometimes it takes a long time for all the components to come together to create something. And so with all that being said, I had to really circle back around, and I partnered with the guys from WTF Comics, and they reached out to me about 1.5 years ago about partnering up. And one of their pitches was that they build Kickstarters. And I was like, oh, that's a huge weight off my shoulders, because one thing I don't share with a lot of people is I have a minor form of cerebral palsy. So typing is a serious issue for me. I can only type with my index finger. So, I mean, even trying to construct the Kickstarter, trying to stay on top of, keeping in touch with the backers, that always seemed like a very overwhelming task. And so I sort of would get gun shy. And so when those guys came involved and decided to, we talked about strategy, how we're going to build it, et cetera, timing, that did take weight off my shoulder. And I also had to admit, like, I can be involved in this in a capacity, and I might be a little bit of the art, whether it's doing the coloring, doing variant covers. But I really need a team to help this, because I mean, a lot of times it does take a team to do a single issue of a comic.
Yeah,
And
because you just mentioned something very interesting, and I want to get back to the option side of things. Running a Kickstarter is not an easy task.
no,
I get approached by people saying, "Do you want me to run your Kickstarter?" And I have an issue of giving up control just by nature, and I also have a philosophy at the exact same time.
oh, looks like I lost you for a sec again.
Back yet? Hopefully, I'm back. Am I
Yes,
back,
you are.
everybody?
Yeah, it only lasted about 2 or 3 seconds.
So I just ran mine, and it's not easy. I'm just going to reiterate. And I have a philosophy that everybody should at least run one Kickstarter, whether you are successful or not. If you really want to be in comics, you want to be on the indie front. And the reason why is that I don't want to ask anybody to do anything that I haven't done myself. That is a personal philosophy. This way, if I say, go bother somebody for an interview, and I'm telling somebody on my team to do it, if I've already done it, I can say it's going to be fine. If I've never done it, I don't think I have credibility to go tell somebody to do something within reason, unless I'm hiring them as an expert per se. There's obviously exceptions, but it's the idea that, you know, it is a real skill, and there is real science, there is real strategy. And the first one I ran, I've learned a boatload, where I'm probably going to be running a second one a lot sooner than people think. And I'm going to be implementing so many tactics, because I realized very quickly there's about 30 errors I made on my Kickstarter that probably cost me maybe $500 to $600. And so it is something that I think people are terrified to do, and it is not easy to run one. So that's all I'm going to say on running a Kickstarter, because it is a beast. And I'm
Well,
sure you've
and,
seen.
and the crowdfunding model, I think, has been successful for a lot of people to get things off the ground. But like you said, like, it's very rare that you'll get this huge success out of the gate, like anything in life, right? But I will say that, I mean, I had to do my share of shilling. Jack Egan built the Kickstarter, and then him and I always in tandem were constantly promoting it on the Black Alpha page, on my social media, etc. And it funded within about a day, so I was grateful for that. We did kind of a lower goal, but I've even seen people have low goals that don't make it. So I'm grateful for the support, and certain people that have been following me on this journey for the last several years minimum. And I will also reiterate to any of those guys out there that if they see this podcast tonight, I'm grateful for all you guys, because they could have checked out. What Black Alpha was in danger of becoming was vaporware. And for what people are not familiar with that term, that's tend to be used more so in the video game industry. But it's the idea, it's like an IP, a game that's been announced, and then you're getting it out, hyping it in the public eye, and then there's all these delays, and then eventually it never becomes a thing. It never becomes tangible product, and your audience feels kind of betrayed, because they're all excited for something that never fully materializes. And I will say too that, having to learn lessons along the way, that I was too busy selling concepts instead of product. I was selling Black Alpha as a concept, or my other IPs as concept. And then I realized, I'm like, well, this audience that's been very loyal, they want to start chewing into the comic story. They want to actually read something that they hopefully can get invested in. And so, so this Kickstarter has actually helped to get it's a reissue of the issue 1 that I self-published years ago, and it's got a few minor changes in dialogue, and it's got some bonus content at the end. And so for a lot of people, they're finally getting to digest the story, which is exciting for me. And I've got a lot of positive feedback. Like I said, production on issue 2 is rolling along. And so at the very least, and we'll probably have to follow the model some people do, where we're going to have to fund a particular issue, do the Kickstarter for that, do another issue. I mean, I'm hoping our next campaign, maybe we can fund issues 3 and 4, which would wrap up the miniseries. But, I don't want to bite off more than I can chew, and we'll see where it goes. But at least,
and also from a strategy standpoint, even if you can wrap off the series, some people say, look, it is, if the money is still coming in and people want this and they want those variants, there is business decisions that get made. I know people who have raised a good amount of money that they don't need to come back to Kickstarter, but they do, because it's just an easy order form for them, and it works. And it's also the idea that they don't want to bleed dry their customers. but they don't want to give them issues 3 and 4 and charge them $25 because they know their customer can only afford 15 every single issue. And so that's a whole big strategy game that goes on. Like, I know the price point that my customers can afford to essentially buy advertising on my show.
Well, and like I said, that's one thing Jack and I will always continue to discuss, because he's the guy that actually builds the Kickstarter. I give input, but that's kind of more of his area of expertise. But we're sort of feeling out our model. We're kind of taking inspiration from other ones that I've seen do that, where they do an issue per campaign funding. But at any rate, and for me, getting the 4-issue miniseries done is going to be a huge milestone, something off my shoulders, because I've never tried to construct my IP as these ongoing series unless there was such a demand for it and you had the resources to do it. I've always kind of done mine as like either a graphic novel one shot, or at the very least, like in Black Alpha's case, it's a 4-issue miniseries, and it's kind of constructed that the 4-issue miniseries would be like a season of a TV show, a film, or a book. And it wraps up somewhat. It'll probably leave a few plot threads if people are interested. But I'm just like, if we could just get that first miniseries done, that's going to be a huge boon for me, for an accomplishment, and because people have been waiting around for it, and it's exciting too, because I mean, this is going on while I partnered up with these 2 independent model kit builders, and they're currently creating a model of the Hermes 7, which is the hero ship from Black Alpha. It's my Enterprise or Millennium Falcon. And so getting the comic moving along, and then also the model kit, for me is hugely beneficial, because it's about product. Once again, it's no longer selling content. And I can't reiterate that enough, that at some point, you really have to get product out to your audience, because they don't want to just like see a couple of pictures. They want to know more. They want to read it. They want to view things.
I agree. It's one of the things where I have purposely made metal cards for my Kickstarter, and I have a bunch of them left over, because there's going to be a point where somebody says, I want that. And so now I have a product that is specifically designed, that's attached to my company. Whether that product is a good product or not, the market will decide. But it's important to have an actual physical product that, I can bring somewhere. Like, hey, I got this. Or, when I order it and they come in, I could like show it off on screen. And I think it's going to be a game changer, because I also think people are going to be like, okay, you actually have a physical product now. And you have something that actually is to show, and you're not just digital anymore. It's the same thing with merchandise. It's very important in a lot of ways. I think that people, see merchandise and see products. It does change the game in a lot of ways. And obviously now you're also getting other products out there, where you're getting a model kit. Obviously you're getting the comic out there. And that also matters, because now people say, oh, this is something I want to read. And also then when you pitch it, you can give an idea to a company saying, this is what Black Alpha is. And then when you have issue 2, 3, and 4 out, they have a pretty good idea of what the story is, plus whatever pitch you wrote and whatever you're doing in a storyboard or however you pitch it. So it does make a difference, I think. And also it's credible and adds credibility, because I noticed, I don't know how you feel about it. Maybe it's a little bit different because you did do Punisher 2099. But I feel like I have more credibility now since I funded a Kickstarter. And I noticed that people are speaking to me slightly differently on Facebook and even in interviews that I frequent on. And there is a little bit of a different sign of respect, I feel, and a little bit of different credibility, saying, well, you actually funded, and you didn't just fund, you did 14% over your goal. So I don't know how you feel about that, and what all
No,
this.
it's incredibly important, because when people approach me on social media, I always put in these little buzzwords that are at least enough to make people sit up and take notice. Marvel Comics did some stuff for the PlayStation Network. Most people know what the PlayStation Network is or was. Black Alpha was in USA Today, Big Bang Theory. All that's a marketing thing to let people know, so that they come over and want to check it out more. But I think now more than ever, because of a successful, and your crowdfunder, your whether or not you're Indiegogo or Kickstarter, it's another marketing tool, honestly. And some people consider it a pre-sales model of your comic. It's another way to get the buzz and the word out about what you're doing. And so I feel like when it's current, because, when people come to me and they're asking about Marvel, and I'm like, well, I haven't worked for Marvel in quite some time, but I put that on my profile because at least that'll make you sit up and take notice for a second. And I always let him know immediately, but this is my real passion and focus, is getting my own comic book universe off the ground in the multi-platform age, and one thing at a time. And because of being independent, a lot of people may not know this who haven't done their own independent comics or whatever, what have you, that, you have to kind of really work with other indie-minded individuals. Like, I don't have some big model kit company coming to me licensed for the Black Alpha ship. I mean, the guys that are doing the model kit are like me. It's all kind of ground floor garage band style ways of building business, and kind of hopefully moving it up from there. And so, the opportunities that I've had have all been about that, is recognizing that, the Cinderella story might exist for 1% of the person out there. There's not going to be somebody who sweeps in with all this financial resources that just said, where have you been all my life? I'm going to take your thing. I'm going to make it a huge hit. Rarely happens. And I had to learn that myself the hard way, that I'm like, yeah, that Cinderella story you've been craving doesn't really exist. And so you always have to have a plan B and C. Like, once again, what am I going to do? And I mean, there's days, I still get frustrated. I've also learned to accept that certain years go better than others. And there's days that anyone's going to say, you know what, I'm having a really bad day. I don't feel like doing this anymore. I don't think I want to do it again. Peace of mind. I'm human. I'll admit that easily. And I've tried to do my best to keep that off social media, but even I've had my moments to kind of vent, to the nether realm or the ethernet, to say, this hasn't gone well for me. But I'm hoping in the end that it will inspire people to sort of get over those moments, ride them, continue to move on. I'm doing it. I know we can all do it, and I'm always learning. One thing I will say, yes, I'm older, but I do credit for myself for never stagnating. I think that we as the human species are meant to constantly self-educate and learn things and never peak, always learn stuff, be open to learning. And so I'm continuing to learn even at my age, and some of it's good lessons to learn, and always interested in finding out new things and new approaches. And
it's very important, in which
yeah,
that I've learned a lot, and I feel like I'm just starting to get good. And I don't want to say this, and as a podcaster, I feel like I'm starting to sort of enter the pre-peak. And obviously, a podcasting peak is different than comics and all that stuff. But I'm now starting to get into that next level right before I feel like I'm about to reach my peak, whether that's in the next year or 2 years or 4 years. I'm getting in, and obviously, I've teed up tremendously. I mean, COVID to me was the great reset, and the great, everybody's now at the starting line. And I mean, I was watching the Daytona 500, and essentially, you have, I guess the pace car, and you can't pass the pace car. And then if you have a lap like that, then the race starts over again, and it's almost like a brand new race. And that's what COVID was to me, and that's why I started doing this live stuff. I decided to say, hey, let me level up my interview game. And, I think it's very important that people need to understand that, yeah, it is, you got to always be learning and figure that stuff out. And also you have to push where you're at. And it's okay to be frustrated. There's plenty of days I'm frustrated too. So all I'm going to say is that there's plenty of days I'm frustrated. But obviously you got another thing going on too as well, outside of Black Alpha. And I know some stuff's going on with Black Alpha. I don't know I think you're in discussions with people, and it's figuring out where Black Alpha is going, whether that's television, film, animated series. I mean, I don't know how much you can talk about where that process is going, but it's somewhere.
well, I will say this. I won't get into
Soon,
any
right?
particulars.
Hopefully a streaming service soon, right?
Well, yeah, I've been in talks with a streaming service. I don't want to get too particular because you don't want to jinx things. And sometimes these things can take a very long time. Um, but I will just say, yeah, I've been in discussions with a streaming service, and it's not just about one particular IP. I'm always selling several. And I've made some great networking contacts over the years, a lot of screenwriters. And I've had some very, very gracious friends of mine that I've met online that will think of me when they sort of get their foot in the door in film and television, and they'll always come back to me and say, hey, I was thinking of you, do you mind if I share a little bit of what you're doing? I have these meetings in Hollywood. And so some of these, actually, I should say almost every single one of them have come about because of people I've met on things like Facebook, where they think of opportunities. And I appreciate that. And I think that it kind of sort of says that, don't be a jerk, first of all. I consider myself a fairly nice person. I mean, nobody's perfect, but I try and always be as down to earth and as pleasant as I can. And I'm always grateful of anyone who's thinking of what I'm doing and approaching me. Even the times that it's been optioned, somebody either set that up or somebody who was in charge of optioning came to me and said, "Hey, your thing looks cool. Let's talk." So with that being said, yeah, I'm in talks with a certain streaming service, but I've always had these talks behind the scenes now for a number of years, and I quit sort of blasting the what ifs and the maybes. I mean, that's one thing I have been trying to work on, because we live in an age where people get so amped up and so excited. And I've seen people, my other fellow comic creators, do this, that, hey, I got a thing with so and so, and people are like, I'm going to be first in line to see it in the theaters, and then nothing comes out of it, because that's the 98 percentile way that things go. There, in fact, you see it all the time, even at Deadline Hollywood. There's announcements that I've seen from years ago that actually had some pretty big movie stars involved, and it's a very complicated process to get IP off the ground in that space. So, with that being said, what's that?
Also, what's going on is the entire comic world on the indie front is relatively going through a big shift, where you have places like Scout and Behemoth and Second Sight Publishing that basically say to Kickstarters, "We like your project. You funded on Kickstarter. You got a cool project. How about we get second distribution rights after your Kickstarter, and we take it over and you get a percentage?" And those companies don't necessarily own those titles, but they're trying to get them into stores. And it's been a big shift and a big mitigation risk on those companies. And obviously, that has changed comics in a lot of ways. Now, how many of those books wind up going into comic stores? How many of those books get a first issue order is one thing, a second issue order is another thing, and then third, fourth, fifth issue. At that point, if those books aren't moving in the comic store, they take up shelf space and they take up another book that could move. And I know exactly all about margins on eBay and selling books, and how expensive it is for ordering 5 copies of a book sitting on your shelf and not selling in a store. It's not the cost that we paid for the book. It's the cost plus another opportunity for a book to move, which is very expensive in a lot of ways. So there's been a big shift going on in the comic world.
For sure. And I think that also kind of brings up a good point real quick, that, it's sort of almost a nebulous area right now, because I have seen some of the discussions about people hooking up with a publisher that can get them in the previous catalog. But really, ultimately, there's not just one way to reach an audience. I mean, I've seen people be successful in just constantly promoting their stuff online and releasing things in chapters, and they seem to be able to get some audience hold and traction there. But anyway, with that being said, these talks go on in the media behind the scenes. I don't announce the movie stuff as much, with the exception of one, because we were going to talk about this other IP, Salem Tusk.
Oh, we're out of time. I'm so sorry, guys.
Yeah. Salem Tusk is my second character that I created as a sophomore in high school, and I created as a 16-year-old, and I wanted to do kind of a Conan, Indiana Jones, Doc Savage character, a very pulpy character, and I envisioned him immediately just as this African-American, just kind of this big, muscular African-American hero.
He looks like Jet Black from Cowboy Bebop to some degree.
Yeah, exactly. And I partnered with Bishop Stevens, who's a former WWE, WCW wrestler, and he's been on The Walking Dead and Chicago PD, and he's been building his career as a Hollywood actor now for several years. And we became business partners on this. And so we were doing selling pitches of a concept trailer about 3 years ago, and things kind of lined up this year now that we actually have a budget and the film is moving forward. It's supposed to begin filming in the fall of 2022.
So let's talk about that, because obviously this isn't a comic, but it's comic-esque.
Yeah.
This could easily be a comic. I think it's pretty clear that this is right out of the world of comic books. And so what is this like to actually see something come to fruition? Because that is a very, very small club in which that I have screenwriter friends, and they wrote a screenplay, and they write screenplays, and some of them win awards. But just because you write a screenplay doesn't mean it's going to be made into a movie. And just because you wrote something doesn't mean that it's going to get into the big screens. And you might have to write 100 screenplays to get one movie in, and then the movie could still sort of suck and it could still go nowhere. So what is this like? Because you are now in a very, very exclusive club.
Well, I will say this, that the power of networking can have so much reach on a number of levels. And because of Bishop and I connecting, and it was a group that I belonged to called The Advisor by James Neil Brodus, and I had shared the premise and drawing of Salem Tusk. It happened to be shared in his group. He liked it, and then he immediately tagged Bishop Stevens in it that very same day. It was, in fact, right around the same time my daughter was getting ready to be born. Him and I discussed it, and I took a couple of days off to be new dad, and we got back on it, and we had an immediate, we clicked, and we had a chemistry. And I think what he was excited by was the fact that, because, Bishop being a big guy, a lot of times when he's been on TV shows, not all of his roles, but like some of the network, he kind of gets cast as the heavy, like a bodyguard to somebody, or somebody that's supposed to look like an enforcer for, say some mafioso type, like in a crime show like Chicago PD. This was an opportunity for him to kind of take and do a positive, big, but strong African-American character, kind of along the same lines as like Black Panther. It's more of a positive, more family-friendly, somewhat type of a character. And so he's been passionate about it as day one, and has sort of used his time and opportunity, and as he's building his career, to sort of introduce people to this character on my behalf, and they've all loved it. And so he's been able, and it's a low budget. I mean, I'll say this is not a big studio thing. So here we are. We're back in that indie space again. Independent comics, independent filmmaking. And there's kind of some interesting contradictions there too, because there is an excitement because you don't have big company mandates, as far as like, well, we're gonna buy it from you, and then we really want you to have nothing to do with it, and we're gonna kind of morph it into something that there's a lot more creative control. But I will say that it's weird to think about, because I mean, it's cool that it's going to finally become a thing. And I think for me, that's kind of what I've always wanted, and it's this character. I mean, it definitely could exist in comic books. The reason there's not a comic yet is that I was always trying to figure out the format. I also wanted to do like a prose novel, like the old pulp, these short adventure stories that have spot illustrations, like, Conan and Tarzan, all those characters. So I thought, Salem Tusk, and he still could. And that's something we've discussed maybe down the road, is doing a version of like a mini graphic novel with, I guess more like the spot illustrations to sort of support the movie. But, and I've actually had this happen in numerous ways, even with Black Alpha. I've had people come to me going, I would like to turn this into a board game. I'd like an RPG. Can we do a old 16, 18-bit, whatever it is, side-scroller video game, anything. And I've always said, I don't have a problem in getting out my IP in various forms. Whoever makes it to the finish line first, cool. But, I'm still like trying to make sure that it's built somewhat with quality, right? And I feel like with Bishop's passion, and I feel like the world I've created, and seeing the cast now come into place, it's really fun, and it's surreal still. I mean, we had a couple of trailers we made, which I've watched over and over again repeatedly, because that was a little peek into, wow, here's characters that have been living in my head, this universe, and I've got actors walking in and giving you a little peek into that world. And so that to me was exciting. And so actually being able to see a film, a low budget action movie, will be so much fun. And there's talk about me coming out and filming on my Stan Lee-esque cameo in September when it starts filming on set. And, so I made some jokes about that. But really, more than anything, it's like the comic. It's like Black Alpha. It'll be fun to just finally see content. And I think that's what I'm more excited about than anything. And so, yes, if Salem Tusk exists as a low-budget action movie, we've got a passionate cast that's into it, and a number of people have become interested, and we got distribution. That'll be cool to see that be introduced to the world that way, just like Black Alpha is finally coming out as a comic, But yeah, I'll admit, I mean, my philosophy hasn't changed. I mean, I grew up loving the multimedia aspect of IP. I grew up loving comics and toys and T-shirts and posters. And so, I mean, I create my IP with the same kind of mindset, but I think I had to learn the hard way. Focus on one thing. Don't focus on all of them at once. I mean, I've had merchandise prototypes created years ago. Some of them ended up on The Big Bang Theory. That was always partially to sort of get in the room with executives and say, this is how it's going to translate to your investment. It's going to be cool looking toys. I'm going to create a symbol that you'll see on T-shirts, just like the Batman symbol or Superman or whatever. This is where this should talk to you guys if you're thinking things in the revenue sense. But I bit off more than I can chew. Like I said, I had to learn the hard way. And so I think that sort of got me some opportunities. But here we are about almost a decade later, and now I'm back to a place like, in Salem Tusk, we're going to focus on a movie. There was talk a few years ago from a guy wanting to do theme park attractions with Salem Tusk and Black Alpha. He still is looking for his funding. He still would like to do that someday. But I'm saying for right now, Salem Tusk is the independent action movie. Black Alpha is the comic. I do have discussions about at least 5 of my other IPs that I haven't shared publicly. I know I have one. We've been talking to the potential producer now, and he's making a lot of headway in Hollywood. We've been talking to him for a year and a half. Things move slow. That's the other thing that I've had to learn. Things, there's no such thing as an overnight success. Sometimes things, like I said, literally take decades to get off the ground. And with that being said, because of my daughter's age, one of the things that I've talked about with my age and how young she is, the only equity that I really have to leave her, is my characters. And so I do have to face the reality, not to be on a downer for a minute, but sometimes people's work will obviously outlive them. And sometimes things will take off after they've left this earth. You know what I mean? And I mentally have to be prepared for that. So that's why I'm going to leave my daughters, my characters in part, in my will, partially with what I plan to leave behind. So that way, if she's able to benefit someday from them, maybe that she'll be in a place and they will be in a place where she can do that, kind of be in charge of an estate. But I don't want it to go that way.
Yeah, of course. You want to enjoy your characters and see them on the big screen first. But even still, I think people don't understand intellectual property. I have my elf up there. That is intellectual property that I own. I don't know where that elf is going per se, and I'm actually building her a sister as intellectual property, but I understand that intellectual property is worth something. The t-shirt that I showed at the beginning of this entire interview, that is intellectual property. And intellectual property is very, very important to protect. And a lot of people don't understand why. A lot of people don't understand how. And all I'm going to say is that get a lawyer and protect your intellectual property, because you will thank yourself later when there is an issue.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And protect it on a trademark level and protect it on a copyright level. And that is not legal advice. That is just common sense. But it's very important, because I understand about legacy and all sorts of stuff. And I don't have kids yet, but I'm building out a huge content library, and I got a lot of content. And when I have kids, this content is going to outlive me by definition, especially if I'm producing 150 to 200 episodes every single year. At a certain point, there's going to be 5, 6, 7,000 episodes. And it's just the idea that it's going to be like, what do you do then with a big library? And it could very well be that my family at some point sells the entire library, and long after I'm gone, and they now have money to do something else, or they might license it out. And there's a lot of stuff that can happen. So it's very important that people think about that in the long run. A lot of comic creators, I feel, don't think about, what does my legacy look like next?
Well, and that's why I said not to be a downer, depressing, but I think that when you're a creative spirit, those are things to think about. Like I said, your work, whatever it is, whatever capacity that your work, something that comes from you as a creator or whatever, doesn't matter if you're a musician or artist or performer, whatever, the work that's there will always outlive you. It will. That's the thing that will live in, as an immortalization of your spirit. And it's good to think of those things because, yes, we'd all like to be around to enjoy it. Like, to me, George Lucas is the poster child for that. Like, he was immediately, when Star Wars blew up right out of the gate, he was able to enjoy, what that was. Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry was only really able to even financially enjoy Trek. I think the late 80s, he got involved in a profit participation program through the, whether or not it was Paramount. And he only got to see the monetization of that, I mean, he got to see it become a pop culture phenom, but he was older too. I mean, he's like me. He became, his son was born when he was in his 50s. He got Star Trek running when he was in his mid to late 40s. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were also in their 40s when Marvel really started taking off. So, I mean, Stan Lee lived a very long, full life and got to see, the work that him and Jack did become these major billion-dollar tentpole films. Jack didn't get to see that. He died quite a few years ago, and his family, was able to at least, they had a settlement with Marvel and Disney, and they were able to at least get something for his heirs and, his family, so that at least they can monetarily, I get support for what the world that he created with Stan Lee. And so that's what I mean. And for my daughter, and real quick, that does remind me. So the other thing that I've been kind of pushing now for the last couple of years is this documentary that a friend of mine, Callan High, who graduated film school last year with awards and honors, he started filming this documentary about 2 years ago. He's had some health issues. That's why it's not completed. And unfortunately, some of those have popped up again. So we were originally going to try and get it done. We were going to have a screening at a con in June, but his health comes first, obviously. And so I'm like, we'll try and finish it when we can. But with all that being said, that's the narrative of that documentary. That's the story he said he wanted to tell. When we talked about a couple of years ago, is that at my age, he finds my story very interesting and unique. That here's a guy that's done things for like Marvel, the video game industry, a little bit of film work. And here you are at your age now being a new dad, which is not a normal thing. I mean, it's more common, but it's still not normal to be a new father in your 50s. And then you're still trying to hold on to your dreams and keep pushing your dreams and balance that with, parts of your life. And so he said, that's the story I'm interested in telling. And it's part of that narrative is about me fulfilling my accepting my fate and my destiny, that I'm in this for the long haul. And hopefully my daughter is part of that legacy now,
It's interesting because I came in on a very corporate level. Pop Anime Comics Lounge, which is my first show, and it's still on hiatus just because it's an edited show and that takes time, was very much corporate. It was very much, mainstream comics, voice actors, mainstream cosplayers, sort of mainstream wrestlers to some degree. And then I've gone sort of down road into indie and saying I'm going to go forward into the uncharted territory, for lack of a better word. And obviously, I'm 29. I'm not saying I'm the same as you because obviously you're playing at a different level, but you have gone from the corporate structure into the indie uncharted territory of wanting to be what Stanley was and Jack Kirby was and what, Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel were and all the people and, Bob, Kane and Bill Fingerman were and all those people who really wanted to forge new ideas. And it's a very interesting concept because most people on Kickstarter haven't done corporate first. And it's very different and it changes the way you view things. There's a reason why I came into indie. I saw where things were heading. And it's crystal clear to me that not saying Marvel and DC are ever going to be out of business because they are the kings and Image is, pretty close third king on the throne here. But definitely indie is dictating a lot of things, I feel.
Well, and I will say this, when you bring up Image, I mean, they just started celebrating their 30th anniversary. I was there when it blew up. Right after that is when I got my foot in the door with comics. And those guys, Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane, Eric Larson, Mark Silvestri, Jim Valentino, they've been personal heroes of mine because I saw what they were able to do. Now, granted, the one thing that I don't have, but that, like I said, they were at the right place at the right time. But they showed the power of being able to control IP and benefiting from that. And, when you talk about Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, for the people out there, the co-creators of Superman, there was a different time and the rules were different. And even Jack Kirby working for Marvel in the early 60s, there was a different system, a work for hire agreement that the companies ended up having the resources to own and exploit IP, and then they benefit from it financially. And of course, down the road, a lot of the creators sort of felt they got screwed over, taken advantage of, et cetera. And Image kind of, to me, changed the current of that. Things changed midstream. And now, even if I don't have the notoriety, I still love the philosophy that for me personally, and I'll say this again, I never begrudge anyone if they grow up and they wanted to draw Batman or have a great run on Batman or any of the household name, Captain America, doesn't matter. If that's what their dream is, more power to them. I know I'm living my dream, even if there's frustrations. Like I've even brought this up as an analogy. If somebody came up to me and said, we'll pay you $5 million or how much a showrunner makes to basically do your new version of an iteration of a Star Trek show or a Star Wars show, but you can never create your own material again. And that, to me, that would be the big kind of seductive moment, because you're like, well, I love Star Trek and Star Wars. They're like my favorite number one things in the world. But if that meant that I had to give up bringing my own universes to life, even with that money, I mean, the win-win would be, well, hey, can I still create my own? Sure, then I can use some of that 5 million to do that. But if it's like, no, you can't do that, then I would say no, thank you, because I still get the biggest creative high from creating my own universes and bringing them to life.
It's a
So,
very interesting thing. I'm applying for a job right now, and there would be a segment of interviews that I couldn't do if I took the job. But at the same time, it's a job, it's a cool job, and there's other benefits. And if I come out of that job after a few years and then I go back to doing something, I might be able to go back to doing a certain segment of interviews at a much higher level. And so it's not you're prohibited permanently. It's just that certain jobs require certain things. And it's very, very interesting that question. I mean, but then again, I don't know. I don't know how I would answer that question because depending on the money. I mean, that's the thing. Depending on the money and my age. I mean, that's how I think it all comes down to, because it's just a matter of money at that point.
well, I'm sure there's a bit of a pragmatic thing where I'd be like, well, if I had that money, I'd put a big part of it in investments and, say, leave it for my daughter, which would be the smarter thing to do financially. But I know for me and who I'm about, I mean, if somebody asked me to stop doing that, that I'm stripping away the majority of my life. I'm stripping away what I'm about.
The difference between you and me is I'm a total sellout. So I'm not
I
the
wish I
first
was.
person.
I mean, no, but I will say this. I will say this. This has been brought up before too, because I've actually had this happen to me and the talks fell apart. What if somebody came up to you? Here's another classic one, because when you're trying to go into these contracts with what a studio owns and how much your percentage is going to be and blah blah blah. If somebody came to you and said, "I will offer you $500,000 to completely outright buy Black Alpha." And of course, we're not, you don't want to get in the minutia of the taxes and everything, but from the initial, anyone can use $500,000. I mean, it's not going to last you forever, but I mean, even that would be something that you're kind of going, that would be tough to turn away.
I've had this discussion on this show with people, and it's a very mixed bag because if somebody created something and said, "Look, this idea cost me 10 grand to produce, and somebody's offering me $1 million," you know, maybe I take it, and then now I have $1 million, and then I go create the next thing, and then it's out of my hair. I mean, this entire show is built on the idea that legitimately pieces of this thing could be spun off. If a company came up to me and said, "Hey, Andrew, we really like what you do with your cosplayers, and we want to pay you to do that exclusively for us on their platform, but we're going to pay you 50K a year. But now I can't do cosplayers on my platform, but I'm doing it on somebody else's." I still own all of that content on my platform, but there's going to be no new content. And that's how this entire Conversations in Pop Culture was designed, that the whole thing could be spun off of Pop Anime Comics, which owns it, or pieces of it could be spun off, because at the end of the day, I'm a business. And if I have to have a spin off, so be it. And it is somewhat helpful for me because it's just a way to structure something. There's a whole reason why I designed what I did, and I don't get credit for it because people haven't figured out what I've done. And there's a reason why, because if somebody's going to give me $1 million for a piece of this, I mean, who am I to say no to that? Depending on what they want. If they want the wrestling side of what I do, they want the cosplay side of what I do, they want the voice acting side of what I do, that's a no-brainer for me. Because I could spin it off and I have 3 other things, and also I can go into 15 other segments and sectors, but I have money. And so it's a tricky question because it is a
Well,
mixed bag, I
the
feel.
tricky question for me at one time was a reality, and it was a weird place to be because through a friend of mine, and this never did come to fruition, but there was a friend of a friend who was trying to start. I won't give it, like, as out of professionalism, I won't give away all the details, but this person was attempting to start a Latin themed cable network, and they wanted to do a block of programming for children. And so they wanted a Latin themed style IPs. So this friend came to a friend who wanted to work up something. I thought their idea was too convoluted, and initially we were collaborating. And I ended up creating this on the phone in about 5 minutes for that particular would-be cable network. And so it had this weird reverse engineering going on where I'm like, okay, I created this for this, but then I ended up becoming too attached to it. And down the road, months later, the person came to me and said, they finally got a chance to check it out. Love this. We want to, since you created this for the cable network, we would like to make you an offer to outright buy it. And so I said, well, things have changed a little bit because I've actually based it on as a tribute to my late grandfather, who was 100% Mexican. And I named the character after him, and I named some of the characters after family members. And so I'm attached to it. So I said, maybe we can work out a deal where, I get a percentage of profits and I'm brought in as a consultant, I guess. And they were cool with that. But here's where the clincher came. Okay, we can, and this is before getting to let's get the entertainment attorneys involved. This is kind of our initial dialogue. They were going to offer me $20,000 to buy it outright. And I said, nope. I said, no. I said, because 20,000 really isn't going to go that far. And second of all, what if this does end up becoming a success and you end up reaping millions from it, And then not to mention that this person also didn't have the funding to even, they were going to try and come up with something to get the 20. It's not like they had 20,000 sitting in their bank. So, but that was an example of like, I was like, well, first of all, the money's too low to outright buy. That's an instant no. And then the talks just kind of fell apart after that, because they wanted to continue. And then that was my one and only, like, we will outright buy an IP from you. And it was weird because, like I said, I created it kind of specifically with the theme of what they were attempting to create, right? It wasn't like I had it sitting around for years, but I still own that IP, and that was a little roughly almost 10 years ago exactly. And that's another one of my IP catalog that I'm hoping, and I've had interest in that one too, that I can get off the ground partially as a tribute to my grandpa. It's in fact, out of all my IPs, I will say this, it's the most superhero-y of all of them, because the one thing I will notice, I don't do straight, tights and capes, with the exception of this one. This is the only one that is, not like pure, I equate it to like Ben 10 meets Spider-Man meets Shazam. It's that, but everything else is always got a bit less of a straight center superhero type story. So anyway, but yeah, so that did happen. I mean, if the money would have been more, then yeah, that might have been a bit more of a difficult decision.
It's also depending on where you're at, and I buy and sell a lot of comics. So there are personal books, and then there's books that it's time to let it go, and somebody makes me a really good offer on the book, and I can't say no to it because it's just good business. But I also have a rule of thumb where if I sell a book that I know that I will never see again, that money goes straight into the stock market, into a dividend producing asset. So there are parameters that are placed on me. And if I was to create IPs and sell pieces off of this or my other show, that money after taxes would probably go straight into an investment and into something that would produce me more cash flow by nature, because that's the only way I could justify it. But that's a whole different podcast and a whole different thing, and I do charge for that advice. So minus that. So if anyone would like advice on that topic, shoot me a message on Twitter, Facebook, or at my email, andrewedavis@hotmail.com, and we can talk about that. Again, I am totally shelling out for myself, but
Nothing wrong with it. This is your
hey,
show.
hey, if I'm not going to sell for myself, how can I expect anybody else to, right?
Right.
So that's
I am looking at the time here. I know on my end here, I'll probably have to wrap it up because it is getting close to daughter's bedtime, and I'm actually sitting here on her bed. So, like I said, it's the quietest room in the house.
You've invaded clearly, and here I thought you were just a Little Mermaid fan.
Well, that, and then you can't see, where the camera's positioned, but I'm sitting on a JoJo Siwa bed. So this is really the things my daughter is really very much into, and it's kind of become sort of my standing set for the last month. We got to get the office, it has to be completely refurbished. And so, like I said, it's the quietest room in the house. I don't mind having a Little Mermaid behind me. In fact, Trish has joked about maybe getting a Black Alpha poster up on the other side there or something. So she can kind of represent Dad a little bit.
Obviously, I don't want to keep you much longer, but I do want to give you a chance to promote yourself. So where can people find you on Facebook, Twitter, social media? Where can people buy Black Alpha? Where could people check out the trailers for Sale and Tusk, as well as anything else that you've worked on? Because you have a long history, and then you also have other things that you do and a variety of other stuff. Also cons, where you're going to be, and all that fun stuff as things sort of open up, and because people
Okay.
want stuff signed. There's Pop Funkos of Punisher 2099.
Well, real quick, I always tell people my number one conduit of sharing stuff and promoting is on Facebook. You can find me under Tom, Tom Rasch, like the way it's kind of spelt there in front of my image. And there's a Tom Rasch Instagram, a Black Alpha Instagram. There's a Black Alpha Twitter. Salem Tusk, you can check out the trailers for it on YouTube. But mainly, if people kind of want to keep up with the pulse of what I'm promoting, 9 times out of 10, they come to my Facebook page because that's where I promoted almost for a decade. And I think the reason I've always gone that route, as opposed to creating like an artist page that I mean, there's a Black Alpha page. I don't have a Tom Rasch artist page, but I like the back and forth, the kind of personal intimacy of what Facebook brings you. You get instant feedback, and people will message you, or you get shows kind of what's working when you post things, the likes and the different things. So those are the main areas. And then as far as conventions go, actually last June, after a 5-year hiatus, I did the Black Hills Con. I'm here in the Black Hills currently. I'm going to be doing that one again in June. And I actually just signed with the Magpie Agency about, a couple weeks ago. And they are a booking agency that books like actors and comic creators and famous people all over the world internationally. So I'm hoping to make some appearances in the next couple of years as things kind of ramp up for Black Alpha and Salem Tusk, to sort of get some appearances. And I will say this, I love doing comic conventions. I've been going to comic conventions now for a little over 30 years. And I've really been busy promoting my stuff for the last decade. I am with my tribe, my people, so I enjoy them. I get to connect and nerd out. But also, I mean, it's also a great other marketing kind of a litmus test to see where you're at. Because I know that, like, when I went from promoting myself as an artist, I knew that there was going to be a big shift and a big risk in promoting my IPs, because then I didn't have Marvel behind me or anything else. People would have to come up and sort of approach me based upon the merit of that. And so that was pretty nerve wracking because it's very vulnerable. You're releasing your thing out into the world and you're not really sure how it's going to go. I mean, there's excitement, there's nervousness. And so, but I will say, yeah, Black Alpha, all those things. I've always, the cons have been about really trying to connect and then promote those IPs. And I will continue to do that. Now that my daughter's getting a little bit older, I'm hoping that at some point I can take her with me, hopefully a couple years down the road, maybe 3, and she can help dad out at the table and help me sell my product. And she's very much an artist herself now. She's got a huge interest in it and she loves to draw and paint. So, I definitely want to make her my little con helper, when she gets older.
Yeah, you got a lot of stuff going on. So obviously there's a million places people can find you. And I'm going to keep saying it because I said it for the last 26 months. And I'm going to say it again for the next 26 months following this, is that you have to support indie. And what that means is you have to buy independent comics. So you got to pick up copies of Black Alpha and anything that Tom has touched, that prints anything at his table, anything in that regard. You have to buy those books. Kickstarters, when you launch issue 2 and issue 3 and issue 4 of Black Alpha, you have to support those books because that's how this stuff gets made. Furthermore, you have to follow people on social media as well, because engaging with them and following them and letting them know what you think of what they put out there, and it actually lets a lot of other people know what's going on, and sharing it out also lets somebody who might not normally see it, because that goes a long way too. And those things are very,
Sorry to
very...
interrupt. I just remembered something because you had one question you had was where they can find stuff. I did forget to bring up WTF Comics. And WTF, by the way, does not stand for what you think it stands for, but that's kind of the fun. The company likes to have fun with that. It's totally different acronym. But WTF Comics, if you go to their website, I've got 2 of my IPs on there. One is The Bondsman. We can talk about that another time, but Black Alpha's on there. And the plan, from what I've understood, is that because I've been getting a lot of questions when people see pictures of the perks, the rewards from the Kickstarter, they're wanting to know, the people who didn't contribute want to know where they can buy, because we've got T-shirts and we've got koozies and buttons, etc. That and the comics itself will also be for sale on the WTF Comics website in the near future. So you can purchase your own copy of issue one, the reissue through WTF, and any of the merchandise. That we've got several different T-shirt styles. So that's where people I've been sending them to if they would like to actually physically, either digitally or physically purchase content from Black Alpha to my other IP, but also they've got about 4 or 5 other titles that WTF is also pushing. So, and like I said, they're a fairly new company, but creatively, philosophically, we're on the same page. They actually made me a month ago. I'm actually their art and design director, so I've been brought into the company on an actual aspect of a role, along with the CFO and the CEO and everything. So, so I've kind of really become part of their creative family. And so, yeah, that's where, if people are interested, that's where they can find stuff to check it out. So.
And so that's where you should go buy Black Alpha if you want to go in. And that's the way out of support if you miss the Kickstarter, I think is a safe assumption. As far as I'm concerned, because I'm going to shell myself out, obviously, if you need to print comic books, use Mixum. Again, Andrew Davis, 5% off. BCW Supplies, if you want to protect your comic books, that's 10% off. Use it at checkout. Pop Anime Comics. It's in the link up above, description above, I should say. Also, my T-shirt is out there. I have my eBay store, Pop Anime Comics Collectibles. I got a lot of cool books up there, and I sell a lot of interesting variants and things of that nature. And I may or may not have something coming in July that's going to be really, really cool, but I can't talk too much about that. And obviously, yeah, I appreciate shares, likes, and everything in between. And on that note, I'm going to give you the final word.
Well, I just want to say, Andrew, it's been about a little over half a year since we last chatted for the most part, but I enjoyed being on your previous episode, and I really enjoyed being on this one. And so it's great to reconnect. And, I definitely, I've really grown some really cool connections and friendships, and I consider you that now as well. I definitely respect what you're doing. So yeah, I guess like you're saying, just everybody out there, do the best you can to support indie artists in whatever capacity they are.
Yeah, I don't think I could have said that any better myself. And everybody, that is a wrap.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, guys.